I'm Liz Bankovich with the Buffalo Niagara Partnership, and I am really pleased that we can spend the next hour with Mike Cardis, who's President of Organization Development by Mike Cardis. And Mike is he's our original executive exchange facilitator. So he's very accustomed to working with members of the partnership and beyond. And happy to introduce Lindsey Zajac, who's principal at Ahern Murphy and Associates. And Lindsey is one of our new leader exchange facilitators starting in September. Both of these programs are part of our leadership development programs at the partnership. Executive exchange and leader exchange follow the same format. They are monthly programs, 2 hours, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. from September until June. We don't meet in July and August. Executive exchange is really for the C-suite, CEOs, COOs, CFOs, high-ranking senior leaders. And leader exchange is really for the developing manager, people that manage at least one person and have been in industry or business or professional services for at least 7 years. And these programs are really designed to give you a forum to speak to your peers, get professional facilitation and leadership by Mike and Lindsey, and they give you an opportunity to talk about your challenges in a really confidential setting. So welcome. We'll begin, and I'll turn it over to Mike and Lindsey.
Good. Thank you, Liz. So as Liz said, my name is Mike Cardis, and this is Lindsey Zajac. And so, I'm going to kind of walk through the format today. We're going to try to have as much interaction as possible. Lindsey and I have done these before for other groups, and it's been pretty successful. Plus, at this point, I'm sure, like most of you, have gone through plenty of webinars, and you kind of sat through a bunch of these. So the format is, in about a minute, Lindsey will sort of share a bit about who she is and what she's been up to and kind of some things she's seeing out there in the field as a leadership person. I'll share a bit about sort of my perspective where we're seeing things. And then we'll probably drop into breakouts. So we'll just to kind of get some networking going on, some discussion, because it's good for you to meet other people in the group. We'll do probably a 5 to 7 minute small breakout room. In the breakout room, we'll ask you to, introduce yourselves, talk about challenges you're currently having, some questions you want, and then we'll pull you back. And then Lindsey and I will sort of take the questions live. And I'll say nothing really is off limits. Like, we're happy to talk about anything you want. Even if it's not leadership sort of focused, maybe we can sort of dance around it for a little, it's fine. And then through the questions, we'll kind of keep giving feedback and trying to make the best of this. So, like Liz mentioned, I've been involved with the Executive Exchange Group through the Niagara Partnership. This is my 8th year working with the executive group, and this is Lindsey's first year. So I'll sort of turn over to Lindsey, and Lindsey can share a bit about who she is and what she's up to, and then we can hear a bit about me. All right, so Lindsey, you want to go?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks for the intro, Liz. So as Liz mentioned, I'm going to be starting facilitating the emerging leaders or the leader exchange program, which I'm really, really excited about. A little bit about my background. I've spent about 15 years in the corporate HR space, working for startups, working for privately held, publicly held companies. You might know Eaton Corp is a large manufacturing company, and PepsiCo. My background in HR really exposed me to talent development, people development, some leadership dynamics, and I became really passionate about learning how to develop future leaders. I loved developing bench strength. I loved helping to get people promoted throughout the organization. PepsiCo was really big on internal promotions. So in 2018, I had an opportunity to join my father's small leadership development firm. His partner had passed away the year before, and it was just him. So I now work with my father. He's out of Syracuse and I'm in Buffalo, and we strictly do leadership development, training, workshops, retreats, that sort of thing. We work with organizations, probably small to mid-sized companies, sometimes large, and we do a lot of one-on-one coaching as well. So we do some executive leadership coaching. And I love the space that I'm in right now. It's been going on now for 2 years. Certainly interesting time to be in leadership. As I always say, leadership's hard on a good day. you know, you're asked to really be courageous and to step up and make tough calls and hold people accountable. And, you know, people are looking to you for how to behave. But I think given the context of COVID and now this sort of weird uncertainty that we're in right now, what I'm seeing is a lot of leaders, we're past sort of the adrenaline stage of like, okay, we're in crisis mode, let's act quickly, let's get people, you know, home, let's get the VPN set up, let's get everybody, you know, healthy and safe. You know, that was sort of a little bit more of a crisis mode, but you can be kind of, I don't want to say excited, but your adrenaline's going. Now we're in this long stretched out period of, well, we're not really back at work. We're not sure how to handle the future. We don't know what's coming. And a lot of organizations are now faced with the financial implications of having to sort of shut down or pause. So a lot of my leaders that I'm coaching are, you know, they're in reductions in force, having to do layoffs, having to give their senior VPs, you know, 100 names to cut. So those are tough. But I have seen some leaders come out and say, you know what, we had a really bad quarter. This was a technology company that weathered the storm well. They said, look, we did have a bad quarter, but I'm not cutting my team. You know, the amount of time it's going to take to lay off this whole workforce that we've worked so hard to build and create and develop and get to gel together. You know, so I've seen leaders sort of stick their necks out and say, nope, I'm not doing this. We're going to weather this storm together. So I think that's encouraging. And yeah, that's sort of what I'm seeing right now, trying to keep morale and productivity going and engagement up, given the context that we're in, are some of the common themes.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsey. And so I'll be quick. So again, my name is Mike Cardis. And I've been with the partnership for almost 8 years now. We've, you know, it's been fun. I work with the Executive Exchange Group. So my sort of background is, you know, I'm a organization development guy. So I approach things from the organization and systems, process, structure, and then look at the inside. So my belief normally is that I say is that systems drive behaviors. And so as systems changes, we got to focus how the system creates the behaviors in the organization. You know, client-wise, like I've everywhere from, I worked with a military branch to create their wartime readiness succession planning for almost 8 years, all the way to small, like grassroots nonprofits at Niagara Falls. So we've seen a lot of groups, a lot of organizations. And I think that, you know, the good thing about today, hopefully, is that much like our exchange groups, we'll be able to kind of talk to each other and kind of hear common challenges. And then from those, you may not get your best answer, but you'll get some ideas and resources. So just some sort of basic Zoom housekeeping things. I'm sure at this point, most of you have gone through this process. As you know, we have the chat box here at the bottom. Feel free to use the chat box. If any questions come up that you want to kind of ask, or you don't want to say your question out loud, use the chat box, that's fine. Also, you can also raise your hand or kind of give a thumbs up. And if you raise your hand, I can kind of call on you after the breakouts, and then we'll unmute you. I'll do my best to kind of make that be as smooth as possible, but you know, sometimes technology is tough. So the intent of today at the core is to kind of really have you guys talk for a little bit, get some questions. For Lindsey and I do my best to answer them. And if other folks have feedback they want to share, that's also okay. So in a minute, I'm going to send you guys off into breakout rooms. It looks like we're going to have 8 breakout rooms, about 5 people. It's going to be random. So we'll give you probably like 7 minutes, plus or minus 5 minutes in the breakout rooms. In the rooms, here's the request. I know it's not face-to-face, it is virtual, but you've done this before. So in the breakout rooms, just take some time, just share who you are, just briefly, just your name, kind of what you do for work. Keep it relatively brief, and then spend some time discussing about what are some questions or challenges you currently are facing. So it can be shared stuff, it can be your personal things, that's really okay. And then when you come back, we can then sort of share the questions and do our best to answer those. Does that make sense? Can you guys give me a thumbs up? Could you kind of get that? Thank you. Thanks. All right, I'm going to drop you into breakout rooms, and we will see you guys in about 5 minutes, okay? All right, thanks. Thank you all for coming back. And again, we're going to probably now turn it over to the group. So at this point, you know, if there is a question, you can type in the chat box, or you can sort of do your best to raise your hand and let us know, and we'll do our best to kind of answer it. So I guess the opening, the first part is, what are some questions that we have that are out there?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'm Tyler Poland,
Hey, Tyler.
and I work at Stark & Wayne. I was in a room with Natalie, Myra, and Nancy. And, you know, there were a couple different concerns that were brought up. The major one was definitely around workplace culture and maintaining it in this new remote work world, and just keeping engaged with the members of the team. And just, we didn't really get the opportunity to get into discussions about how each of us was dealing with those challenges. I'm sure each of us had our own solutions. On my team, we have weekly socials on Wednesday afternoons, and weekly academies on Fridays that bring the team together. And then our COO also runs a AMA every Friday afternoon. Which,
What does AMA stand for?
Ask Me Anything,
Nice.
which replaced our happy hour, because we didn't all have liquor cabinets and didn't seem reasonable anyway. So I'd love to hear other suggestions and other opportunities to engage the team. One of the big aspects is that getting people to actually come to that social half hour is a challenge. Everybody wants to stay engaged in their work and doesn't necessarily want to break away, but still it's important to maintain that culture. So thank you.
Yeah. Lindsay, you want to go first for a little bit, then I'll go, then we can see if other folks have ideas.
Sure. Yeah. So I love that it sounds like your organization is already doing a couple things right now. You mentioned the socials on Wednesday, you mentioned the Friday academies. So there are times where you're seeing people, is that correct? It's on like a Microsoft Teams or something. How many people in your organization total?
So we have about 35 right now.
Okay. And are you going to be remote for the balance of the year?
Yeah, I would say that we most likely are.
Okay. So do you do weekly one-on-ones at all with your manager or whoever you report to? Does that happen?
I do monthly one-on-ones with my manager,
Mhm.
and weekly to bi-weekly one-on-ones with most of my team.
Okay, good. I mean, so one idea, and this is kind of me just thinking outside of the box, is again, I don't know what the comfort levels are of the people on your team. I realize that 35 people can't go back into an office building, but could you meet somebody for coffee, you know, one-on-one? Could you
Okay.
go grab, you know, drinks outside at a brewery with a couple people? So you're like socially distanced, you're seeing people outside of work. I mean, what I've read and some of the things that I've learned is that developing relationships outside of the day-to-day work is so important for building that camaraderie, that trust, that ability to sort of work more efficiently with your coworkers. So if people are willing to do that, you know, I started meeting some of my coaching clients at a coffee shop and we're 6 feet apart, you know, if that's possible, that might be one idea, because I think people are a little bit Zoom fatigued. So like if I get invited to another happy hour on Zoom, I'm probably not going to go. It's just not my thing anymore. But I think it's important to see people and get out of your house, get out of the office if you can. So that's kind of one idea. Keep the communication channels flowing as well. Sometimes because we're working remotely, we communicate less because we're not seeing people. So I want you to think about if you were in the office with them and you would walk by their desk on your way to lunch, or you would see them in the hall, you know what I mean? Those infrequent kind of casual conversations are not happening when we're all remote. So we almost need to find a way to sort of bring that back and communicate even more. And maybe it's a phone call. And maybe it's, you know, you go out and walk your dog and you call someone on your team, but that kind of infrequent casual conversation needs to sort of take place as well. Those are just some ideas. I mean,
Yeah, I'll add like 2 or 3 quick things. Number one is this challenge it's tough because again, like unless your team is already used to working remotely, like it's a different world. Like so some teams are already remote, they got the flow down. And the reality is we've seen that you can't take what you did face to face and drop it onto Zoom. It doesn't translate. There's no communication across those over. So some things we're doing inside a larger organization is this. Number one, we're having randomized sort of meetups every week, where again, like through a random number generator, every employee is given a number, and then every week they get a partner, and they either call or Zoom with that person every week. Not everyone's a hit, but it's sort of like it's like random dating, right? In your organization. But the hope behind that is to keep that communication going between each other. So they're randomly creating, they have thousands of employees and trying to make it cross-departmental. So every week it's saying, hey, you know, Tyler, you're talking to Natalie this week, and you get a little Zoom call or a phone call. That's doing good stuff. Another thing we're seeing that works pretty well too is also doing more phone calls, which sounds kind of almost even sort of opposite, but telling folks like, hey, reality-wise, instead of a Zoom call, I might just call you on the phone, because there's that Zoom fatigue that kind of happens, and it helps keep the connection there. And the third part, it sounds, Tyler, like you're doing a lot of good things, is having those open discussions, but also as a manager, if you're managing staff, if you find staff are being less responsive, you have to reach out to them. You have to make a greater effort to say to them, hey, I noticed you didn't turn your screen on last week, or hey, I noticed you've been late to the meetings. Is everything okay? Because, you know, honestly, like right now, people are going through a lot of stress. And I mean, the funny thing is, even while you guys were in your breakout rooms, my daughter came in here because she needed to find her Wonder Woman sort of cape for her costume, right? So I was like, oh, here, honey, here it is. But like, the culture piece is there. And then also one thing I'll say too is that the work now, if culture's falling apart, in many ways, this is due to the reason that before COVID, you didn't build strong processes in the beginning. So like companies that are now struggling to kind of get things done are companies that were relatively weak before COVID hit, and it's hard to pull that trust back. So I'll share one quick example, then we'll do another question. So one of the gentlemen in my executive group, I won't say who, was saying that, hey, currently they work for like a media company. And they were saying that, hey, the weird thing is that, you know, in the media company, we have a lot of employees who are loyal to each other and loyal to their team or loyal to the action. So if news is breaking or something's happening, he has folks calling him saying, hey, I want to do this. I'm on it. I want to be on it. But they're also negative towards the organization, the company as a whole. So he was saying in my group, he goes, it's kind of weird. I go, I don't think it's weird at all, because historically, a couple of years ago in your company, when things got rough, they laid people off. When things got rough in your company before, the company didn't treat people very well. And now, because people want to bond to people, but the company treated folks poorly in the past, it's hard to get that culture going again. So it's just being thoughtful about Tyler and the group is saying, are we making efforts to reach out? Are we doing the communication pieces? It's all those sort of things. That's my best response.
And Mike, I like that you mentioned the phone call, because even though you're like, well, I'm not seeing them, people are getting tired of having to like show their faces too, because sometimes they can't be as authentic. You know, like if Mike were to call me and
or
he's not
shave or shower or do your hair.
Yeah, well, maybe I could just say, no, I'm having a hard time today. You know, and like I don't have to put on my happy face in front of a screen. I can be more authentic. So sometimes when you call your employees and check in, you know, we might get more from them than if you're just looking at them and they're like, how you doing? I'm great. You know, so.
Plus, it's funny. I was reading an article last week too about just the intense amount of intimacy that we're showing by showing folks our homes, right? So like in the office, it's your office, but like in the home, it's a much more intimate space you're inviting people into. That's also, so, but Tyler, I think, you know, that's a good piece. So I see another question popped up over here from Sue. I'll read it out loud. How are leaders addressing their team members? How are leaders addressing their team members when everything happening in the world? Sue, do you want to add some context? Oh, go ahead.
Yes, like for example, we have COVID-19, the death of George Floyd. You know, because we can't, when you're in the office, you would be discussing this with everyone. And I have discussed it with my team members. I have skip levels with our customer service reps. So I'm just wondering how other leaders are addressing their team members. Because I don't think we can remain silent. And, you know, when you're face to face, I think sometimes it's easier than being on the phone. And, you know, I'm asking the team members how they're doing, but I was just curious as to how others were handling that.
Yeah, I'll go, Mike, and then Mike, chime in.
Yeah, and then we'll let the audience answer that one too. That's a really good one. So
a really good one. So couple notes. I like that it's even top of mind for you, Sue. I like that you're thinking about this. I think part of it is if you're having one-on-ones, because sometimes people don't feel comfortable talking about these topics in a group. They don't know where people stand on the spectrum. If you're having a one-on-one, spending 5, 7, 10 minutes in the beginning, how are you doing? What's going on? And if you've developed those close bonds in that relationship, they might say, I'm really freaked out about my kid going back to school, or I'm really upset and hurt by what's going on in the world. I feel really sad about everything and I want to help, but I don't know what to do. So you can start to kind of get into their headspace, what's on their minds, what's troubling them. And you don't have to have all the answers and you don't have to play therapist, but the fact that you ask and you're giving them a safe place to talk about things, I think is showing that you're not tone deaf to what's going on in the world. I have seen some leaders get their small teams together and they'll have like a Friday half-hour session where just let's talk about what's on your mind. That's another sort of like safe place. It's not about work. It's about what's going on, and people can vent and people can talk, and that seems to work really well for people that live alone too and don't have any support person to talk to or vent to. So those are just a couple of ideas. I think you want to be mindful that you don't want to pretend everything's hunky-dory right now. Let's not pretend that it's business as usual, because it's not, and there are a lot of things going on in the world. You could also share what you're reading, or a book that you found that was helpful, or a cause that you are following now, or some place where you donated some funds or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So those types of things can help as well.
So, and I'll share again, maybe a more practical thing. 2 companies I'm working with who have now gone 100% virtual, and some of the employees are told you'll be home from now till the foreseeable future, pretty much. They created, they created Slack channels. So they have one Slack channel that's called like diversity and inclusion, so they created sort of like subgroup Slack channels inside their IM software. Now, again, there are HR concerns, all those sort of things, but you put the rules up there pretty straightforward. And interestingly, like that Slack channel, it's called like diversity and inclusion concerns, is a very active channel. So like the folks self-organized education programs, they self-organized like some like small group meetup, group meetup things. There's also a parenting Slack channel where they made it private for parents only, because they didn't want folks who don't have kids like chiming in about masks, it's tough. I mean, I have 6-year-old twins, and so like so they made sub Slack channels I think it was created by the own employees to have these discussions to get stuff done, and that's been helpful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, very good.
Yeah, and so I guess anybody else out there, any other sort of ideas? Because I mean, the world of work and home has really kind of collided in this sort of like messy thing. So anybody else have anything else they're doing in their companies that lines up with that?
So we have a global team. I like the idea of creating a safe space where people can talk one-on-one about issues. But one of the challenges that we have is we have folks in Asia Pacific and the European regions that don't share a particularly high view of American politics in general.
It's tough right now.
And so we actually had to put it out there that there's no political discourse at all in any of our Slack channels.
Right.
And that may actually be problematic, which brings me back to that one-on-one, the safe space to have that conversation. But those are conversations we can't have as a team because it just doesn't work well.
Yeah.
I can have a quick thought. Yes. Just in terms of engagement and happy hours and keeping people social, keeping people real. I think I had a really successful happy hour last night with incoming graduate students. And it was around a theme. So yesterday, it just happened to be one of these wacky holidays. And so every day has a wacky holiday, right? So I found it aligned with Serendipity Day. So we had everyone it was like a rapid round robin. So people showed up. I had 25 students show up, and we had this rapid round robin where they said who they are, where they're from, why they chose NU, and what is something serendipitous that they've discovered during the COVID period. And so I teed it up in the invite so they knew what they were coming to. But it was really fun because everybody got to say something, right? And everybody got to tell a little bit of their story, and everybody got to see each other's face and name. And we had a ball, and it was a whole hour, but it felt like 5 minutes. You know, it just went by really quickly. So I think, you know, having a theme and then having a structure and then having a place where everybody can say a little bit about who they are and why they're here. So there's more of a collective, I think those are important features.
Yeah, I'll add one thing, and this is one thing that I've also recognized, is that like even doing workshops, I mean, with the theme thing is right, but even doing workshops, like I'm at the point in my career where I can show up at like an office with like my bag of markers and a flip chart paper, and I can run for 4 hours or a full day, right? I can do it. It just, at this point in my career, it's just kind of nature to me. But doing the Zoom workshops, I've had to kind of go back to my whiteboard and my planning and actually create like detail, like what are we going to do? What are we going to talk about? And kind of, you know, when I first began doing workshops, I would spend hours going through the content, the curriculum, the planning, the meeting structure, all those sort of things. I don't do that anymore, but then with Zoom meetings, I spend hours, like Whitney said, kind of going through the theme, the purpose, the setup, the reason. And so it's forced, I think one thing that's hard for all of us is replanning how we go about this, because as managers and executives, you've been doing this for 20, 25 years. And so you can walk into a room of employees and kind of run a meeting, pretty basic, but now you're on Zoom, you have to kind of go back and realize that old sort of rule of thumb that for every hour of content, there's 3 to 4 hours of planning for that content to make sense.
Right.
It's also a way to be thoughtful.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Whitney, I like the idea of the theme. Another thing I've seen that's been helpful is I know some people in the Leadership Buffalo program right now, which is mostly virtual, but they've had a few events where they're out, you know, spaced out and in small groups, but they go and they do like economic development day, or they go and they do transportation or poverty day, and then they get together for a happy hour. So you have something to kind of discuss. So maybe you're not going to do that, but maybe you do a workshop or a training, or you do something at work, you know, maybe it's the Ask Me Anything topic, like Tyler said, and then you get together for a 30-minute happy hour. And people can sort of, because you're hot off the press of some information or some new context that maybe can drive some dialogue. I think when you just say, hey, we're meeting for a happy hour, join and bring your drink, and it's just like, do your elevator pitch. You know what I mean? I think people are sort of, they've lost interest in that. So you're better off either with a theme or a topic or something to discuss.
Structure.
That might help people engage.
Yeah, the structure, the system. Anybody else want to add something with that one? Because I think Tyler also made a good point. It's one thing that, again, it's, we talked about a lot about this in the executive exchange, is the challenge of having those HR rules and those challenges. And, you know, Tyler, I've done some work internationally too. And like, and it's, as a leader in an organization to handle those HR and those different cultural perspectives, like it's a hot button topic. So it's just,
I have one thing to add.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, it's actually not myself. My wife works at a large university locally, and what they have, they call them cohort chats, and they are coordinated by HR. So they do apply, you know, some of the rules that we've already kind of mentioned here. But what is done is they send out, typically it's a link to an article of a theme.
Mm-hmm.
People jump on the call. They have, you know, an icebreaker that may or may not be related, you know, to that particular topic. But then they'll go through and say, and, you know, who has thoughts on whatever. It's structured in the sense that the topic is structured, but it's a little more free form, you know, in how people react. And they've gone from having, you know, maybe a couple dozen people join to now having triple digit.
Wow.
And now they've actually been asked to renew another series. There is a lifespan to it. I think they do them for, you know, 4 weeks at a time or whatever it is. But now they've been asked to renew them. So that seems to be working for them.
Cool.
Nice. Great idea.
So I guess let me ask, we can stick with this, or does anybody have another question they want to kind of put out there to Lindsey and me in the group that they're thinking about? You can unmute or raise your hand or type it, whatever you think.
Mike, if there isn't, I want to give people time, but if there isn't, there were a couple themes that came up in my breakout room that I think may apply to most people on this call.
Okay.
So that might drive some discussion. So we had one theme of how do we keep people engaged, keep morale up as they're working remotely. You know, we've got an individual who's running a call center, and the call center is now all remote. So they're not used to that environment. The other theme is just knowing that people on your team might be like getting mentally drained and mentally fatigued, and you know there's so much stress going on, and how do you help them when you could tell they just want to get out of their office, they want to get out of their house, they want to go back to work, but they're kind of stuck in those four walls. Those were two of the big themes that came up.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll go with the motivation one first.
Yeah.
And that one again it's becoming more and more prevalent. So I was telling folks that when COVID first hits, right, there was a typical sort of reaction where again there's this it's called the Hawthorne Effect. So years ago, in a lighting plant, there was it called the Hawthorne plant. They did this weird experiment where they asked employees for feedback. Employees wanted more light in the room. They put more light in the room, and production went up. Right. By that point, they were scientists, and they said, "Hey, I wonder what happens." And so they asked folks for more feedback. They made the light darker. Production went up. They gave them different benches. Production went up. So the research says that anytime something novel is introduced into a system or to an organization, production tends to kind of go up and spike, but then it levels off and drops. So I think COVID is a good example of that. So when COVID first hit, we saw a lot of folks pulling together, a lot of folks like, oh my gosh, my people are more productive than ever. So the novelty alone was enough to kind of spike new processes. But now we're so far into it where it's becoming a drain. It's becoming sort of challenging. So the novelty is no longer there. Like it's no longer fun to work at home as much. It is for some people. So the motivation thing is tough. And so, one thing that we're doing in organizations, again, is taking a lot more time to have those reach outs and those check-ins, which is just a basic sort of thing, right? It's just taking care of people, checking in more often, encouraging more communication, which is easy to say, hard to do, but also is giving people more flexibility. So like, for example, my wife, Christine, at her company, luckily her company, she works for the federal government. They've given her, I think she has either 40 or 60 hours of like parental COVID time to use from now through October. So they gave her more time to use, kind of take care of the family in COVID time. And I know we all can't do that. Another part of the motivation thing again is really, it's gonna sound negative when I say it, is that you have to be thoughtful about monitoring people's sort of behavior and their needs. But on the other end, part of the motivation also has to come from the people themselves who work for you. So they have to also sort of figure out how they're getting things done. So part of that is offering your EAP programs, offering development for these sort of things, and putting them there. Because again, one thing we say to managers a lot, and it came up, is that you're not a therapist and you're not their therapists. So it's important the rules are there and the tools are there to kind of take care of things. But if you're seeing people having motivation issues and issues with that, the first part is, reach out to them, see if they need things, give them resources and tools, and do your best to make that take place. But it's tough. Lindsey, you want to add something? And then we can turn to the group.
I mean, you covered a lot of it. Yeah, I think you don't be afraid to use resources like EAP, employee assistance programs. Those are common in a lot of larger organizations. I know my sister worked for a company where there was a certain amount of therapy sessions you could get for free. So like if those types of programs or services exist, definitely let people know about them. The other thing I would say is if it's possible, yes, you're working remote and you're at home, but can you go work at a coffee shop? Can you go work outside at a picnic table? Can you change? I'm getting really sick of my office that you guys see here. I can go work on my dining room table, or I can go work outside on my porch, assuming there's no people mowing their lawns. But like sometimes we just need to change up our space, to change up our creativity and to, you know, mix it up a little bit. I know at, you know, at Wegmans, you can now go up there and work as well. So, you know, trying to be creative if possible so that people can get out of their four walls they've been in since March is one idea.
I'm sorry. One thing, I mean, I don't know why, so like, I'm under a contract with a large company out of Seattle, and this is, I mean, you can do it in small scale. So one thing we're doing there is, as COVID was starting, as we're bringing employees back to the organization, we were capturing a lot of what's called sense-making or employee experience data, which is more of a sort of West Coast term right now. So with that, what we were doing, and this is the shift to having the organization do something. So we created a simple assessment, and the opening question, and they were given the survey or the question. It was daily. Now it's every 2 weeks, and it would pop up on their phones or on their work computers. And it was, the opening question was, you know, we're reopening the workplace for you. What's a recent experience you would share with a friend or close family member, with a friend or family member, about what it's like to return to work? And they wrote that short narrative response, and they qualified it as positive or negative. And then we use a series of questions to kind of say, like, you know, does this experience reflect resources on hand, feeling when you walked in the building, or like your personal needs and experiences? So we created 6 what we call sense-making questions. Then from that metadata, we saw trends. So we could say, hey, we saw as folks walked in the building early on, a negative experience that the employees had is they felt it was clinical, and they felt they were being like walking into a prison. Temperature, please, fill out this check mark. And they felt the waiting room was very uncomfortable. And so we fed that back to senior leadership, and they were like, yeah, the room does kind of suck. And so they spent like probably $5,000 to make the waiting room more comfortable, put chairs there, and make it more opening to employees. And so one thing you can start doing is, you know, surveying is tough, but I tell people all the time, it's looking for trends. And so what this company in Seattle is doing, and they're progressive, and we're doing it now every 2 weeks, and we capture the metadata, meaning we look at the large scale narratives and we actually read the narratives. So we'll say like, oh, Bob said that a positive experience is, you know, we put the partitions up and he saw that their partitions were up, and he saw that there's cleaning supplies in the bathroom that make them feel more comfortable. And so as we capture those things, we reflect it back to the employees, and that helps them see you're doing things. So you can figure out ways in your organization to kind of figure out ways to kind of capture people's experiences and what they're doing. And that's been really helpful also as we're going forward now, and as changes are happening, because there's a lot of insecurity of this company in Seattle. So right now, as things are changing, the employees are more open to feedback. But that's one thing I think the company can do, is figure out a way to capture the meta feedback or the large scale feedback and do something about it, right? I mean, how many of you in your companies have done employee engagement surveys and you've done nothing with them? Right. I mean, in Buffalo, Western New York, for example, we're all so survey fatigued with employee engagement feedback, management feedback surveys, and the employees don't see anything happen. That creates more negative behavior. So if you're going to do this, you have to figure out a way to actually take the feedback and make a small change and reflect it back, and folks see that being a useful piece. Again, if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to share with anybody in the group like the template we used for some of those questions. With a small company here locally, they do a small nonprofit. They're about like $5 million plus or minus. With a small nonprofit, we set up a similar process using mural.co. So Mural is like a shared like whiteboard software. And so we're doing the same thing monthly with employees in this small nonprofit. We're asking them about work-life balance and how planning is affecting them. And they write the response on like small, you can do it online. They do like Post-it notes, and they put it inside triangles. And then every month as a entire organization, we read everyone's response as a team, and we talk about, what do you want to do with this? So we're seeing, for example, in the triangles, one is like, my story reflects my family and my family and loved ones, myself, my work needs. And so if we see the work needs are getting too intense, we'll kind of say, there's a lot going on now with work needs. Do you guys need more time for your family and loved ones? How do we make that happen for you? And we talk about it. So that helps a little bit. Sorry, that was a tangent, but thank you.
No, and I was just going to piggyback on that, Mike, is ask your team too for input. You know, like sometimes I think as leaders, we get caught up in this vacuum, like we've got to know the answers. We got to know what to do next. We've got to come up with a great idea and say, hey, how can we drive some more engagement as a group? And I know this is dragged on and we've been remote now for 6 months. What would you like to see happen? Or what am I not doing? Or what are we not doing that would make it more more fun or exciting to be at work. And there's all sorts of wacky ideas out there. And they might be talking to coworkers or friends or peers or neighbors that have had interesting things happen in their organizations. You know, something as simple as like, you know, you can't bring in lunch for your employees, but maybe you can do DoorDash and they get to pick out, you know, a lunch item on Fridays and it gets delivered to their house. I mean, there's so many creative things like that.
And I'm getting ahead of myself. This company in Seattle, they also spent a lot of money where they shipped every employee across the country like a gift bag of like almost $300 in like fresh fruit and like veggies and stuff, where they shipped all the employees like these gift bags to their houses. Now again, that's capital intensive, and you guys aren't all giant companies, but with smaller nonprofits, we've been to say that we've gotten like, we had one company that's bought almost like $2,000 in Tim Hortons and Starbucks gift cards, right, and sent to their employees, and that helps. Right. It's those, again, I know it sounds really simple, but it's that basic stuff of kind of saying like, reach out to people, communicate with them, be empathetic, and just try not to be mean right now. Anybody else want to add anything with that? Any other ideas that you've seen work inside your company to keep people motivated, or what's kind of kept you motivated out there in the audience?
This is Alyssa. So I just have, and this is something kind of different, but we're going through change management, obviously, with everyone being home. And we recently announced that we have a new affiliation. And I think our staff is very concerned just in general with, you know, that the state of their positions and their jobs. So we're dealing with a lot right now as a company. And I guess, does anyone have advice on how to help with that? Because not only do we have COVID, you know, the world itself, but now we have this affiliation coming. And I just think people are on edge and worried. So we want to help ease that. So any advice on that?
I'll go first. I'll be brief. But Alyssa, it's that is a really tough question. It's happening a lot right now, and we're seeing it in a lot of places. So, you know, the response is, number one is that you want to ensure you can communicate to employees as much as you can about what's currently going on and keep them as informed as possible. I know sometimes executive leadership wants to keep things relatively quiet, but we see in organizations that if you keep things too quiet, people make up stories to fill in the gaps. And so a lot of times the question I ask companies is the behavior of the leadership team attracting trust to the organization or repelling trust from the organization? And attracting trust usually means when a bad thing or a challenging thing happens, do employees feel it was done fairly, they were informed about it, and they were at least had the opportunity to discuss it, and they knew about the process, which is a challenging part. Because I mean, I think about when I was working for Clemson University, you know, there were some things that were done that were pretty weird, but there's some things where like my boss pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Mike, our funding is running out in 8 months. We're not renewing your position. I'm sorry about that, but we're letting you go in 8 months, and it sucks. But it's what's happening." And I was like, I didn't like it, but I still felt there was some trust and connection to where they pulled me aside and talked to me about that. So I think the part is try to communicate what you can without communicating too much. Number two, if you don't know, be okay just sort of saying like, at this point, we don't know that. We're going to figure it out. And the third part is, and this is sort of the executive talk, be careful not to make promises that you can't keep later on. So when we're doing leadership training, Lindsey and I talk about this a lot, that's that functional part, what we call wisdom. And the wisdom comes from, do you know what to say, how to say it, and where folks feel that you're still creating trust without sharing too much that may kind of eventually, you don't want to make promises you can't keep later on, because then folks will kind of come back and say, but you said, you'll see, I know I said that, but we can't do that now. So it's really messy. I think at the end of this, it's sort of asking yourself as a leadership team, what choices can we make that will attract more trust to the organization? So even if we got to do bad things like layoffs, reduce staff, that people feel we did in a trustworthy, sufficiently open manner to ensure things kind of, people feel not good about it, but they felt they were honest and they felt that we were being upfront with them about the process. Because I mean, we've all been part of where like, I've been part of this, where you go to work one day, everything's fine. You show up next day, the doors are locked. And you're like, WTF, why are the doors locked? And they're like, and then you get a phone call like, hey, by the way, we closed the plant. And you're like, but you didn't tell me that yesterday. And then trust is lost.
Yeah, and I would just say that, sharing bad news is not something anyone likes to do. Me personally, I hate to deliver bad news, but delivering bad news is better than delivering no news. So if you're in a leadership position and you're at a point where, look, we've had 2 quarters now where we're not making any revenue and the PPP's run out and we do need to start looking at potential layoffs, be as open as you can or transparent as you can. Maybe we're going to need to cut 10% of the workforce and we'll have a final decision made by September 1. Give people some timelines, give them some data. You can't say, I promise you're not going to be affected. I promise your department's not going to be affected, but you can give them, it's this percentage, we're going to look across the board and you'll have a final answer from us by September 1st. And even though that's a sucky thing to say, it's better than not saying anything. And we used to say, it's funny, when I was at PepsiCo, if things were too quiet for too long, the very tenured employees would be like, something big's coming down the pipe. Like they would, and I'm like, you guys are conspiracy theorists. Like you guys are nuts. But they'd been around long enough to know that when you haven't gotten a lot of emails, a lot of calls, a lot of invites, a lot of communication from headquarters, they're working on something. So I'd rather not have my employees in survival mode coming up with conspiracy theories about all the negative things that are going to happen, and rather get out in front of it and say, we are in some tough financial times. We're going to do everything we can not to make layoffs happen. But if we do, we're going to cut about 10% and we'll have more information for you by September 1st. I mean, that's kind of all you can do,
Yeah.
Yep.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Liz. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's great. Thank you. No, that's good feedback. And that's just something, obviously that's more for the executive leadership team, advice for them to try and set some, but we don't know what's going to happen, right? But it's just kind of managing through it right now with our frontline staff and just trying to assure them as much as we can. But like you said, not making false promises. So.
Yeah. And then I think you made it also, it's also being okay to sort of say to staff, at this point, I really don't know. Like, I'm not hiding things from you. We just really don't know right now. As soon as I know something, I will let you know about it as soon as possible. And that makes folks feel uncomfortable. But again, and the fear is, what if we lose people? Well, the reality is, like, you may lose people. But they have to, in my opinion, this is sort of a tough thing to negotiate, is as adults in organizations, they have to always have the choice to stay or leave, right? And that's okay. And so if you're honest, say, we don't know. If someone chooses to leave, then you say, that's great. I wish you luck. Please stay in touch. And they go, and that's tough. So anybody else have any advice on that question, sort of keeping folks motivated when you're reducing staff or things are really uncertain right now? Anybody else? All right, so I'm going to say this. It's about 11 o'clock right now, so we had an hour for the call. I think things were there was a lot of stuff today, and I think I keep using the example of identifying, complexity in organizations. And I made a joke. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I taught a class at UB, University of Buffalo, on complexity and sort of disaster management. And we did all these models, all this planning. At that time, it was focused on nonprofit sector when there was Medicaid redesign happening. And I say, the reality is like the world shifted in some ways, and now like all these complexity skills, all the change management stuff is really being pressured. And so as you're thinking about this, like keep thinking about, number one, like what do I know? Right? What do I not know? What do I have to learn? And the most important thing is this, and I say this to all my executives, is you have to become really damn good at looking for patterns. Say, hey, you know what? I see a small, and we can call them weak signals. What are small patterns or what are strong patterns? And say, I think this pattern means something. We got to learn more about this. And being able to recognize sort of, if employees are upset about things or if you're seeing shifts in the market, it's being good at pattern recognition. And that's going to help. So by the way, this was recorded. We're going to send a recording out to all the folks who registered. If you want to, you can feel free to reach out to Lindsey or myself. Lindsey, do you want to put your email address in the chat box? I'll put mine down there also.
And I was just going to add too, some good advice I got. I listened to a podcast and Simon Sinek was on it, and I love him. But he said, really important right now is as leaders, you listen first, listen, learn what's going on in your organization, with your people, in the world, in, you know, all these dynamics that macro level that might influence your business, and then you lead. So a lot of times as leaders, we like to just kind of like charge ahead and have the plan and execute, execute the thing. And we sort of need to flip that on its head, because we're in such an uncertain time and we haven't been through this before. So if you listen, learn, and then lead, you'll be much more equipped to handle what's coming at you. You can't just rely on the old tactics that maybe you did pre-COVID. So I found that a helpful thing.
Cool. So again, Lindsay and I put our email addresses in the chat box. Also, you know, we encourage you to sort of reach out to each other, talk to your friends. Like, you know, this really is a challenging time for all of us, but just do your best, right? Keep looking for patterns and work together. So with that, that's sort of the end of the call. So if you guys want to hang out and talk, I'll be here for a little while sort of cleaning up. Lindsay and I are happy to stay after and talk to some folks if you have any more questions, but if you want to leave, you can feel free to leave. I'm going to end the recording now, but thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome.